Right, everyone. It is our kickoff time. So I am going to kick us off, and I'm going to say, shh. We are here to learn the secrets of digital content for policy engagement. So I've got a bit of explaining to do, and when we decided to do this session, I knew what I wanted to do it about. I knew I wanted to do it about digital content because I think it's really, really important, especially in relation to some of the topics that have been discussed earlier in the day, narratives and storytelling and that. And so I knew I wanted to discuss digital content, but Erica asked me to do a blurb. And I have to admit, I was very, very lazy, and I just went nah, 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 nah on the keyboard. And really, frankly, a bunch of chimps banging on the keyboard would have done a better job of the blurb that I wrote and the title that I wrote for this. But nevertheless, I am going to run with the ball in regards to secrets. I'm John Schwartz. I'm the CEO of Soapbox, and I will be your spy master for today's session. For those of you who don't know Soapbox, we're a design and communications agency. We work almost exclusively with think tanks and other wonky organizations, and I'm going to let you in on a secret now. For those of you who know Soapbox might know us for the think tank websites we build, and I guess in the On Think Tanks community, I'm probably quite well known for my work on branding and visual identity, but the secret is this. This feeds into the discussions, as I say, that we've been having already in the conference about narrative power and about storytelling. So my secret is that while we at Soapbox build what we hope are really great websites that are findable, shareable, accessible, all of those good things, and act as a home for a think tank's digital content, and we design what we hope are great visual identities, including work around editorial structures, tone of voice, so on and so forth. That will allow our clients to create that digital content. Too often, they continue to produce content in the same old way, based around whatever report they happen to have coming out at any given time. So, shh, don't tell anyone. But if you're serious about your brand and you're serious about your organizational narrative, then you're going to need to produce digital content that is relevant, that is regular, that is creative, and that hits the areas where you have expertise and where you have that story to tell. So how can we operationalize that process? I am joined today by three experts. First is Jen Staves. Jen heads up content design at the Department of Education. And in a previous life, she was at Wellcome Collection, where she helped revolutionize their editorial strategy. So Jen will be disclosing the mysteries of how you can build your brand with quality storytelling, with editorial content day after day. Jen wrote what I think are some of the best blog posts ever on editorial strategy that a knowledge organization should adopt, and I'll be posting those links in the chat for you all to read later on. And if you only take away one secret from these sessions, then read those posts and do what they say. But you should take away more than one secret. Franz is here as well. He is the Chair of Innovation and Creativity and the Director of Technology at the CSIS Ideas Lab, where he produces a lot of the most innovative and interactive think tank content out there. He's moving on from CSIS and going freelance. So there's a chance maybe for some of you to get to know him a little bit better and get him to do the same for you. Paul will be imparting the magical formula for engaging with research to create some really amazing content, especially around mapping and GIS data. Hitting your topic areas day after day with relevant, timely content is really, really important, but so is pushing the boat out with creativity and innovation from time to time if you want to build your brand. And of course, all of that is absolutely useless, as you all know, unless you can make that content hit its target. So I guess there are three secrets, really, that I want you to take away from this. Clair Grant-Salmon from IIED is here to spill the beans on how you can put your digital content in front of the right audiences and how you can do that consistently and in the channels where those people already are. There'll be plenty of time for questions afterwards. But perhaps more importantly, a chance for all of you to share your own secrets for digital policy engagement. Please, please, please use the chat for your questions and observations. You are our co-conspirators in this digital web of secrets that we are spinning here. And we'll pick up on your questions and ideas after we've heard from our speakers. And that is the end of the Google synonyms that I found for secrecy. You'll be very glad to know. Jen, please can you kick us off and start disclosing some of those mysterious content secrets, please?
Absolutely. Thank you for that high praise, John. I hope to live up to it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So if someone can just let me know when that pops up. Increasing digital engagement with your organization. And John mentioned that blog post I wrote. You'll probably, if you do go and look at that blog post later, you'll see a lot of similarities in there, but that makes sense, doesn't it? So I hope that can give you a good intro here. And this is my starting point, really, because digital channels, websites, social media platforms, email, they've become sort of destinations in and of themselves. They are people's experience often of an organization. But in thinking of our digital comms as part of the organization, if we go on to that, if we go from thinking that they promote your organization and we move to thinking that they are your organization, it means we have a chance to connect and form relationships in a strong and long-lasting way. And to increase engagement on your channels, you have to move away from that sort of promotional thinking to thinking that they actually help deliver on your organization's mission. So one thing we did, for example, although we called it a blog that I wrote, and that actually was a blog, but what we did at Wellcome Collection and the strategy that I put together was to move away from a blog, move away from posting something, what happened in your organization this week, what's interesting, what report came out, to moving towards magazine style storytelling. We weren't the first to try that. I did not invent it. There's people in the UK, people in the US that sort of borrowed from and sort of worked with, but that's what we did. We moved away from being what's happening right now to what can we say in an ongoing way. So at the time, the strategy recognized that our digital offer was part of our organization rather than promoting it. So that we could deliver on that, we moved from blogging to journalistic content. And we needed, this is the key part really, we needed to tell our stories in a format that people were primed to consume already. So we couldn't just start writing. We know from newspapers, from magazines, from other things that people are used to, that we can reduce their cognitive load by using formats that are already out there and that people are ready to engage with. So we looked at our vision and then we tested a range of those formats to see which ones resonated with users and where we could refine. So our vision, just the vision for Wellcome Collection when I worked there, was to challenge how we think and feel about health. So we knew there we could take those sort of verbs, we could take those nouns, and we can start to use that to say, okay, now we have a few formats that we think will work. And actually, once we tested them, we ended up dropping a few formats. And interestingly, we ended up dropping some of the sort of more expensive, kind of flashier formats that you would normally think you absolutely must go with. And we stuck to 6 formats that were actually far more sustainable. So I'm just going to show you a few of them quickly. This one's essays. I've got a couple of examples here, and there's 2 types of essays here. There's a lived experience essay, and there's a researched argument essay. And I'm guessing that in your organizations, you might have a lot of that kind of duality as well. You've got your researchers, you've got your very learned academics that are, that have a lot of interesting things to say, but you also have maybe the people that you're trying to help in the long run. So it's quite nice to be able to bring in both, and both can work in an essay format. Interviews. So we know, for example, that from our research that many of our users, but not all of them, crave expert behind the scenes insight. But at this, and so here, for example, we have curators with a wealth of information. And while they're experts at curating an exhibition, they're not necessarily experts at translating that direct to digital. So we decided to use freelance journalists to interview our curators so that we knew we were giving our users what they wanted and what was interesting, rather than what often happens is dumping the content online that didn't fit into the exhibition. And I imagine that resonates not necessarily in an exhibition way, but for many of your things too, that you think, oh, this didn't fit into the report, let's dump it online, and this didn't fit here, let's put it here. So that's one. Book extracts. So Wellcome Collection has an impressive book publishing program, and we knew that was high quality content. So we worked with commissioners and publishers to establish what was appropriate. Serials. So this is the one that I mentioned. We had a high value sort of interactive format early on. And it was gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And those who did engage with it did enjoy it, but it was too big of an ask to ask many people to engage with it, this huge, interactive, deep thing. So what we did is we brought it back to like the old-fashioned serial, the kind that Charles Dickens might actually publish. And we had a sort of weekly drop of a story. And this one, for example, was the history of the NHS. Comics. So this was just something lighter that we ended up publishing on a Friday. And the origin of these comics is a lovely one. You know, there was just somebody actually in the house who has an exceptional talent for illustration. So we ended up commissioning him, in addition to his day job, to draw a comic a week. And these built a humongous following on Instagram, actually. You can swipe through the comments and it was really good. But basically what I'm trying to say here is it was a format that worked for us. And then image galleries is something really interesting too, and always brings it back to the research. So our research showed some interesting things. We had stopped doing image galleries because they were more topic led rather than story. Often ended up being something like, it's National so-and-so day. Here are 10 images that we have that sort of don't really match. So we stopped doing it. But then our research showed us that users wanted those images more than ever. So then we crafted and tested a narrative image gallery in which the images tell story in order. So for example, this one's about AIDS awareness in the 1980s. And rather than a sort of listicle of 10 images, this story sort of visually explained how AIDS awareness campaign evolved. So I think that's the important thing John mentioned, narrative at the beginning. That's the golden thread running through all this. So we did this day in, day out, dropping things on a regular basis. And what we were able to achieve, these are some of our numbers from a couple of years ago, is that we had more people coming to read, which was our key metric. More people reading for longer, which was also important. And then you can see that one actually makes my heart sing because we doubled it. And then fewer people leaving without interacting. And this hard work and focus sort of pays off. And that's what you have to do, is you have to build up that really beautiful regular cadence, and you have to make sure that it fits. One thing I wanted to show in a way that we could see that this was working was that other sites actually picked these stories up and drove traffic to our site. So this story, it is a catchy title, I'll admit, but it was written and pitched by an academic in Leeds who uses our archives. And she pitched the story herself. And it's a really good example, I think, about how it's sometimes the people outside your organization who have the best ideas on how to still tell the stories inside your organization. And so Dig picked this up, probably just because of the keyword anyway, but it is a really good story. I recommend you reading it. And it ended up sending loads of people to our site, and we retained a lot of those users as well. I often like to show this because kind of after you have the sort of case study out of the way, I just want to be clear that I don't think that this is the only digital content that you should be doing. And so it's just always kind of useful to look at it like this, I think, and to see that like this middle column is what I was showing you before. And this middle column is the thing that too many people miss, too many organizations miss a trick on, and it's that digital content as a product or as an experience. If you miss that, then really, yeah, you're missing a trick. The other things on the side are really important still. Sort of the digital advertising, it has its place for very specific campaigns. But I think too many times it's the digital content that sometimes ends up taking the place of that campaign. And then obviously the functional content, the user-focused website content, those journeys that facilitate, those are really important too. I just want to mention that because sometimes people do get worried like, oh, how will I make the rest of my website content fit into these 6 formats that you're saying that we should do? And I don't think you should. So I think what's nice is that you can do this too. And I say it's relatively simple. It's not relatively simple, but once it's going, it's actually the most sustainable, beautiful thing ever. But you need to decide your formats, using research. You need to stick to them. I'd recommend shifting to that pitch and commission model, because ultimately when you are trying to do the content yourself in-house, then you can't give it that same headspace. You want to think pictures, you want to start small, but be consistent, be transparent. And I think the last one, it's not sexy, but it's really important, is that you should go back and update your old content. So the formats, I've just included a few examples here that you can start off, and it's a really good way to kind of think about your own organization and think like, which of these are really relevant to us? For Wellcome, certain ones were never going to be right. Investigations never going to be right. Explainers weren't right for Wellcome Collection, but could wholly be relevant for a different type of organization. So you need to think about how you want your users to feel when they experience your content, and you can look at search engines too. You can see what users are searching for that's relevant to what you can provide. You can do user research, you can test your ideas, and you need to decide what your success will look at. You don't have to do, like we have 6 formats, but you could start with 2 if you know that they're working. And that's how you start to build a relationship. So I said the pitch and commission model works for me. Worked for us. Obviously, it still does take time, but I think your organization is bursting with brilliant stories. You just don't often know it, or maybe sometimes you pick the wrong ones. Sometimes, the perspective is not right, and sometimes in-house people aren't the right people to tell the stories. So you can consider using freelancers to ensure your content doesn't skew too promotional. You can let people know you're open to pitches as well. I think the operationalization, sorry, that's always a mouthful, but it's really important, is so key here. You have to be consistent, and you have to start small. And 1 day a week of good content is better than a blast over a month and then nothing. Or, we've got a big campaign. I mean, oftentimes I find that organizations, their budgets are set up for this kind of bad content way of thinking about content. It's like, for this project, we've got this much money, and we've got this much money that we can spend on a campaign, so let's do it, but then that project is done. So you have to think programmatically if you want this to work. You have to publish regularly. You can end up, you want your users to come to expect it. Oh, Friday afternoon, this happens, or Saturday morning, I always know I can, sit with a cup of coffee and read this from this organization. You've got to have your guidelines, and that's like going that step beyond like tone, because tone is really important, and branding, is important, but you need the guidelines that really help you make really good quality content. That means you don't have to go back after it's done and update it because you got something wrong, or because, you didn't do your due diligence and fact checking. Like, you must follow those things. I've got a Trello board here because that's how we ended up doing it. It's a thing of beauty. You can use anything you want, but it was quite nice to have a sort of visual way of looking at it. I think once you move it out, you're going to have to be transparent too. You're going to have to track your performance, and you're going to have to see what's working and what's not. And you have to be willing to stop doing things that don't contribute to objectives. Like I said, we stopped doing image galleries for a while, but we ended up going back. But you can keep doing that. And then also you should go back and update. So I've got 2 images here on the side that show the same article. I mean, there was a website redesign. We also, committed to going back and updating things. The article at the top was one of the highest visited pages on our site because it says science and art. And that's the kind of thing that when users Google science and art, this page happened to come up quite high. Unfortunately, it looked terrible. It wasn't structured well, even though the sort of sentiments behind it were really beautiful. Who would want to read that? Who wants to kind of curl up and read that? Not necessarily anybody. It didn't have an author. It didn't have images. It wasn't structured properly. So if you go back and apply, your content principles to old content, then Google will notice that. It improves your ranking, and then the user can start to enjoy it again. Any new person who Googles science and art now gets this page at the bottom, and then that's the beginning of potentially a journey with us. The other thing to say is that you must archive your content as well if it doesn't help you achieve your mission anymore. And that's really hard to do. Some people can't let go. 3 users last week looked at this page. Well, it's not helping you achieve your objectives. So you really, really, really have to let go. So the one thing is, I just wanted to say that it can work for any organization. And I think we're running out of time, so I will stop there. But I have a sort of step-by-step we can always revisit in the questions if we want to. So I'll stop sharing there.
There will be a recording of this presentation. I will be sharing it with all of my clients because, frankly, that's just what you just explained what they should be doing. And some of them, it does seem like an insurmountable barrier to hit this kind of drumbeat of content day after day, but I don't think it is. And I think that, as you've shown the Wellcome collection, that's something that is doable for every organization. Now, the CSIS Ideas Lab has produced some of the most engaging and innovative think tank content of the last few years, and Paul has been a really big driving force in that. And one of the things I think is really interesting, in particular about CSIS, is that they explicitly made that a priority for themselves to go out and start producing that content and to start operationalizing the production of that content. So he's going to share some of his experience with us now. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon to my colleagues on the East Coast of the United States. Good evening to most everybody else in the chat right now. It's a real pleasure to be talking to you today about how CSIS over the past 8 years transformed its digital content strategy. And I'm going to be citing a very specific case here. I'm going to go into how we really changed things and really put CSIS's research on the map. And just permit me for 1 second. Everybody see my presentation? We're good? Excellent. So in a former life, I used to be a journalist. About 13 years ago, I was in the print industry. And when we talk about engagement at think tanks, a lot of the conversations, a lot of the hand-wringing we've heard about is this attention deficit that has come hand in hand with the digital era. But the more we've had these conversations, the more I recalled conversations that I had when I was a print journalist. I distinctly remember when I went to news conferences and trade conferences that there were always topics about, well, do readers actually read after the jump on a front page? And those kinds of ideas are very similar to the same kinds of challenges that think tanks are experiencing today. It's not so much about attention deficit, but I think really the problem that think tanks are having right now is that they have an attention getting problem. They're not thinking about the most effective ways to reach the audiences and achieve specific objectives. We're thinking of digital think tank content as just a repository of all the research and all the writing that our research programs do. One of the ways that CSIS addressed this issue, I want to bring you back about 6 years to 2014. We have several Asia programs who wanted to bring attention to what the Chinese military was doing in the South China Sea. And one of the ideas that we had was, instead of writing our 100-page PDF and writing a report and then publishing it on our site, becoming inevitably a paperweight that would languish on Congress people's desks, what we did was we wanted to go get the images. We wanted to actually commission the satellite imagery because we knew, for those of you who don't know about this story, the Chinese military for a number of years has been building and paving over coral reefs in the South China Sea, erecting military bases and installations. And we knew of the locations of these installations. And we worked with then Digital Globe, currently Maxar Technologies, to send their commercial satellites over these locations to actually take pictures of these locations, actually show our audiences and the broader public what was going on in these areas. And so this picture really spoke to our internal researchers. They finally realized what it meant when I said that a picture was worth 1,000 words. It was one thing to say it, it became quite another to actually show the practical effect of that saying. And what you're seeing here is quintessentially a Washington, D.C. photograph. The man in this picture is Admiral Harry Harris. He was the commander of PACOM under the Obama administration, and he's pointing to one of our images that CSIS procured through Maxar. What you're seeing here is the Fiery Cross Reef military base. He's showing a Senate Intelligence Committee hearing what's actually going on. And this really set off not only an external debate, it really informed the public debate. President Obama and Premier Xi Jinping, they publicly reckoned with this issue after he had released these images in 2015. But more importantly, there was an internal reckoning. We realized that through satellite imagery, we could bring our research alive. And coming along with that, of course, was mapping too. We realized that because of the specific nature of what CSIS does, geopolitical research, focusing on issues of national security, they started to see how important and critical getting this kind of imagery and adding map analysis to their research was. And you can see here the practical effects of this. Jeff Dyer from the Financial Times saying that CSIS, among all the other actors in this particular scenario, was one of the most influential in affecting the public and political debate over the Chinese efforts in the South China Sea. So what have we been up to since then, since 2014? Well, we've expanded our use and import of satellite imagery to cover these pressing security issues, but we've also married that with mapping and creating mapping tools, interactive displays, and more recently, about 2 years ago, we've started moving our efforts in geospatial towards more narrative storytelling. And one of the big challenges that we asked ourselves in 2018 was really, how do we marry this rich data and rich imagery that we have, and how do we transform that into a compelling visual briefing? And so what I'm about to show you right now is the most recent product of this effort. It's been ongoing for 2 years. Sit back and enjoy.
China is attempting to rewrite an ambiguous border. It's a relatively rare feat today for a country to stand up to China in defense of a smaller country. India is doing that today on behalf of Bhutan. The Doklam Plateau sits at a strategic location, really right at the corner of 3 different borders. China and Bhutan have a long history of trying to resolve a disputed border that dates back to an 1880 treaty that really had ambiguous terms in terms of where the border begins and ends between the 2 countries. After 24 rounds of talks, which were inconclusive, China and Bhutan were to have another round of talks in 2017. But instead of negotiators, China sent bulldozers. India chose at that moment to defend Bhutan's territory. They sent their own army across the border into Bhutanese territory to stop Chinese advances in building its infrastructure in the contested area that Bhutan had controlled. After a 72-day standoff, China pulled back, and for a lot of folks, that's actually where the narrative ends. But that wasn't the end of the story. While China slowed its incursion in that specific direction, actually since that time, as our satellite imagery shows, they've actually expanded their attempts to take over Bhutanese territory in other sectors of the disputed Doklam region.
What is remarkable when you look at the imagery is that this has to be one of the most remote, inhospitable, and rugged pieces of terrain anywhere in the world. The scope of the Chinese activity is also quite remarkable. You see switchbacks going back and forth on mountainsides, barring any unforeseen circumstances. For the near future, it appears that the Chinese are going to continue their construction activity, spreading it further east and maybe a little south, and that they're there for the long term.
The strategic significance of the Doklam area, frankly, there is very little for Bhutan or for China necessarily, unless it comes to a hot war scenario. The area in normal peacetime, relatively uninhabited, no natural resources that we're speaking about, but during wartime could be very important for China's ability to cut off India's ability to connect to its northeast states. Now, the United States has really been reaching deep and trying to find new ways to cooperate and deepen our defense partnership with India. We don't have a treaty, and yet a lot of American strategic analysts that aren't so familiar with South Asia keep wondering why. What's the return on investment? But in reality, we are seeing that return on investment. It's just not in the areas that the United States considers really the front lines in the main struggles with China, with Russia, and other places. It's happening today. It's happening in the Himalayas. It's happening in the border area between India and China and Bhutan.
All right. So I want to say a few words about this particular piece. I will surprise some of you in the audience here by telling you I wrote no code to make this. This was entirely the product of a video and motion designer's workflow. And one of the big reckonings that we've seen over the past few years is that GIS, along with tools of mass communication, are increasingly becoming democratized, and they are increasingly becoming more cross-disciplinary. So in prior years, GIS was exclusively the province of geographic nerds and analysts and engineers. No longer. Products like the one that you had just seen there, you do not have to be an engineer or a front-end developer to make things like this. So to give you an idea of some of the tools that we're using, Mapbox Studio, free to use. Depending on how much you use it, it might become a paid tool. But primarily, this project was the product of After Effects and Premiere, both Adobe applications. And as you go down this list here on the right, some other add-ons. One that's pretty remarkable, and for folks who want to try building their own map videos, it's a very powerful tool that was just released by Google, Google Earth Studio. It makes their full suite of Google Earth imagery, 3D data available to everyone. If you have a Gmail account, you can use it too. But the thing that is more important philosophically about this particular project is that it really just encapsulates this idea. Think tanks are remarkably, at least in Washington, they are remarkably predisposed to creating repositories of information. Just endless reams of data, ideas, information. They need to first and foremost think of their research as creating and writing stories and narratives, not repositories. A few benefits specifically to the video medium in this instance is that, yes, there is a written report talking about the Doklam Plateau, and that has its application towards the wonks and other India-US policy experts in the community. But we really wanted to bring this issue to light, make it more publicly accessible. And map videos in particular, you know, it's not falling victim to this idea of every single repository of information of geospatial needs to be a dashboard hell, as I like to call it. Excuse my language. The other two really nice benefits are primarily technical. You do not need developers. You do not need to outsource and hire very well-paid development firms to make these things for you. And more lastly, this is very relevant to anyone who's done a presentation in a federal network or a very secure corporate network. I'll relay a story. When we first built the satellite image website for the South China Sea, I was invited to present it to an executive council next to the White House. And seeing as this was one of my first websites that I had ever built, I was really worried that it wasn't going to be secure enough. But as luck would have it, the logistical coordinator for the federal government, his only question to me at the time was whether I could put that website on a CD. And well, the reality is I can put a video on a CD very easily. I'm not so sure about a website. So practically speaking, what has been the output of these videos, these map videos? We've made about 20 of them so far, but we've certainly influenced and engaged, and we've made an impact in the geopolitical conversations of our time. Last year, we predicted the strike that the Iranians made on Saudi oil facilities and infrastructure. More importantly, we really highlighted the oversights of the Trump and North Korean negotiations, pointing out that the North Koreans have basically accelerated their missile programs, which are the primary vehicles for any nuclear weapons they may develop. And more importantly, for our analytics-minded folks in the room, our engagement and our view numbers are great for these videos. Most people are watching them. They're, in terms of raw view counts, very high, and they have done much, much better than any of our normal event output or other produced video output. And more relevant to our times, so when we started releasing the information that we had found on the North Korean missile facilities, President Trump, of course, tweeted about it, directly referencing our research and the New York Times story that was based off of it. So that is the art of doing map videos. It is only one part of our digital strategy, but over the past 2 years, it has been one of our most effective. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paul. That was fantastic. What a fantastic example to share. We've seen really brilliant content there, but what we are going to need, I think, if we want to have that content be really impactful, is we're going to need some marketing to make sure it gets in front of the right people. Of all the think tanks that I deal with, IIED is the one that I think takes marketing most seriously. And Claire is now going to blow the lid off some previously hidden knowledge about how IIED reaches those audiences.
Fantastic, thank you. I will do my best. It's really great to be here. Thank you, everybody. I follow some great presentations, so I hope I can add some secrets to this list. Let me share my screen and I will show you. Let's do this. So yes, as John said, I'm head of audience development at IIED. My role in a bit of marketing, a bit of digital stuff, and a bit of data. And I will touch on all of those things in this presentation. Now, when I talk about building up digital profiles, this is what I mean about the kind of branding side of your communications. So this is the marketing of your content. And it's this unique combination of your audiences, what you're trying to achieve, and the content that you're generating that helps develop your unique digital identity. And what you need to do is get that out there, get that to your audiences, and position that alongside your peers in the kind of policy space. It's important for you to realize that this is similar to how you might build a person's digital identity. This is your organization similarly has this digital identity which you can build on and which you can share via marketing. Now, most of what we do at IIED is not that sexy. It is fairly process driven to get to that point, and I'll run through some of those processes here. These are the three things that we do, and I'll touch on these in a bit more detail. But we start by putting audiences at the heart of what we're doing for our digital communications, and I'll talk a bit about the ways that we do that. But the idea here is that we're really building up these relationships with our audiences to understand them and also to find new ones as well. Really concentrating and focusing on how to choose the right digital channel for our message to make sure it's getting out there in the right way, and then using our data afterwards to really understand what's working and what isn't working and keep improving that process as we go along. So focusing on audience. This is really important for us. As I said, when we work with researchers, they know who their audiences are. We don't tell them who their audiences are. We work with them when they tell us who they want to talk to on ways to understand how to talk to those people and also how to find some of those new audiences that they don't know already. The idea here is that we are driving the idea behind not lots and lots of messages, but really good quality messages and ways of developing our digital engagement. So that we can share the message in the language that they speak. This is sometimes technical, sometimes less technical, sometimes needs translating. So thinking a bit about how we can really make them feel like they are being spoken to personally. And it also supports a kind of long-term perspective in terms of building relationships. So this isn't about one moment of splash with our audiences. This is about building a long-term relationship in terms of trust and credibility, so that they do trust your profile, they do trust who you are and what you're saying, particularly in an era of fake news, and so that those audiences actually seek our help and come back to us and eventually become our advocates. And it's also really important that we don't where possible, where we don't have unlimited resources, unlimited staff, unlimited time, that we try to avoid those people who aren't interested in what we're doing, because sadly not everyone will be. So it avoids throwing resources at things that aren't going to work. Now, we do a lot of audience profiling. IIED. We do stakeholder mapping when we talk to our researchers about who they want to talk to. And we actually, where possible, add a bit of personality to our audience, because it really helps people to understand who we're trying to talk to. So we ask questions about where do they find their information. So is this online? Is this from a library? Is this from another person? So how are they seeking their information when they want to make decisions, and what decisions are they actually making when they have that information? We also ask questions about how much time they've got to consume that information. The comms team at IIED tend to deal a bit more in terms of the time poor. We'll do kind of shorter, snappier, more concise communications, and we work with our researchers to develop the longer, maybe research reports, documentary style videos, things like that. And also, as I said before, we're asking questions about the kind of language that those policy audiences are speaking. So are they experts? Can we talk in, can we use technical terms? Can we use a bit of jargon? Can we use acronyms? Or actually, are we learning? So are we talking in really kind of basic, clear messaging to help them understand what we're trying to get across? And also understanding how they are digitally connected. Are they digitally savvy? Can they do the things we're asking them to do in terms of digital content? We'd work with a lot of people based in developing countries. So are they urban? Are they rural? Are they on a phone? Are they on a shared computer? Will their bandwidth take this? Do they have access to other kind of software, hardware tools? So really helping to connect our audiences as much as possible and understanding how they can connect as well. Now, when we have this picture and we're understanding a bit more about our audiences, we can then make decisions about choosing the right channel to send our message. We have so many digital channels to choose from, and I would say that you don't need to throw everything at every channel. And helping you to make the decision about the right channels depends on things like knowing who your audiences are, knowing what your objectives are. So actually, what are you trying to achieve? It might be that you're trying to mobilize a community. So if you're actually trying to mobilize a group of people, which space can you have where they can share ideas, have dialogue, and connect on what you're trying to make decisions on? Or are you, do you need a more broadcast format because you want to share key messages with somebody, or policy pointers to influence policy? So really understanding what your objectives are help you identify which channel is best for that. Now, we hope as much as possible that we're not end of pipe, that we have been part of developing the content and the message, and being connected to that message and to the content really helps you understand which channel is the right channel to share that with. The nature of digital channels quite often as well is that we can have a 24/7 approach, but not everyone will be listening all the time. So consider the timing. For example, a digital event gives you a really kind of fixed moment of engagement when you can connect people. Something a bit more like a social network enables you to choose according to time zones who you might want to connect with and when. We do use a variety of channels at IIED, but we're not scared of understanding which channels we use best and using that mix well. So we don't put everything in the same way into all of our channels, but we do use different ways to kind of support our message along different channels. And some of this is about making sure that our audiences have a kind of clear journey along the content that we're developing. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. But the idea that we can hit audiences in different ways with the same message to kind of reinforce our identity and our brand and what we're trying to say. And then, of course, evaluating those options just to check what does work and what doesn't work. And I'll talk a bit more about data shortly. So let's just focus a little bit on taking our audience on that path. Don't worry too much about the detail here. I don't know how clear that is for you, actually, but we quite often do this kind of scenario mapping or kind of user journey mapping. So we take the person that we developed when we were talking about our audiences and asking all those questions, and then put them into a scenario where they're actually coming across our content. So this is Dagmar. Dagmar follows us on social media and is a fan of mining. This is actually small-scale mining, artisanal and small-scale mining, and we did some research in terms of kind of informal markets and how this kind of fits in alongside the kind of big-scale mining that happens. And we worked out what we wanted to understand was how Dagmar got along that journey from liking us on social media to actually receiving some information about our artisanal mining content and the work that we were doing. So we mapped this out as much as possible to make sure that when she's, you know, she got a message to sign up, she clicks on a post, she arrives at a web page. How do we then take her to the next step? How do we tell her about our newsletter? What do we actually want her to do? So taking her along that journey. So hopefully she ends up signing up to our quarterly newsletter, and then we're sending her relevant content. And we can use checks all along that way to kind of identify how she's engaging and how that's working, and hopefully build up that longer term relationship with Dagmar as we go along. And we can use data all the time to understand these journeys. And we're using a lot of data at IIED at the moment to really understand how people are engaging with our digital channels. And the idea here is that it really supports our decision making and informs the delivery, our kind of digital delivery of our messages and what we're using. So we're not just monitoring. I mean, I look at data every day to get a picture of what's happening. Some of that is just to check that something hasn't fallen over or broken and that we've still got the stats that we're expecting. But also we collect data to help us kind of evaluate what's working and then learn so that we can make that better as time goes on. And this supports our kind of decision making. It provides evidence, accountability, transparency to people within our organization, to our leadership team, and also externally. And again, it helps to build up that kind of trust and that engagement with what we're trying to do. And we're using tools. I mean, we're using Google Analytics on our website. We use our email stats. We saw, particularly during lockdown in the UK, that our stats on our email newsletters were really going up, and we were getting a lot of engagement. So as a result of that, we decided to increase the frequency of those newsletters. As soon as we saw that was dropping back, we actually reduced the frequency. So we reacted to the data and what seems to be a kind of need for that content to that audience. We also saw that people were clicking on climate change content. And so what we did is we decided to set up a climate change newsletter that just highlighted that content. And now we're building subscribers in that way. Social media gives you lots of numbers. And also we put all this data together on a monthly basis and present this to the staff at IIED so they can kind of see what's happening. There's a little bit of kind of friendly competition there, but also it helps kind of people understand what we're trying to do and gives them a baseline so that they know kind of what's good and what's bad. Maybe they can see how our digital networks are growing, so they can put those into research proposals. So just a bit of kind of understanding what's happening and what that looks like. So this is my last slide, but a little reminder of what you can do is put audiences at the heart of your digital communications and really understand who you're talking to. Choose the right digital channel for your message. It doesn't have to be everything. It's fine to just concentrate on a few, but make that the kind of right decision, and then using your data to continue to improve that. So yeah, that's everything I have on that. There we go. Thank you very much.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Claire. That was absolutely fantastic. We're going to go to some questions and observations now. The first thing is I do have to clear off, first of all, is that there was a question about my footwear early on in the discussion. I'd forgotten that my pink boots have become something of an on think tanks thing. So I did have someone fetch them for me. And I will be putting those on now. More importantly, there's an interesting discussion in the chat about leadership and the role of leadership in this. And there's a mention actually from Enrique of an On Think Tanks presentation by David Nassar, who was for a long time the VP of Comms at Brookings, who I would cite as someone who had a very, very clear idea of how he wanted to lead comms in that organization. Does any of our panel want to come back on the question of leadership and what's the importance of leadership in making these kind of strategies happening, and what are we looking for from our leaders, bearing in mind that we do actually have some think tank comms directors in the audience who I'm sure will be interested to hear what they should be doing.
I can take a stab at that, John. Yeah, I think the concept of air cover is incredibly important. I don't think we would have gotten to where we are with the Ideas Lab at CSIS in the 8 years that we've been in existence without the support of our CEO. John Hamry, who is the CEO of CSIS, I mean, it was in his prerogative in every meeting that he had with our research program directors, he was asking them, are you using the Ideas Lab for this project or this grant that you're using? And he made it he didn't need to be like technically involved. He didn't need to be saying like, you have to do it exactly this way. But the fact that it was coming up in conversations and that he generally supported the mission and philosophy of the department made our jobs a lot easier. Because the research program directors, their staff, they were coming to us with ideas. Because if they weren't doing it, the CEO was less interested in whatever research work that they were doing.
I would 100% agree with air cover. I that would have been the first word out of my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you absolutely have to have that. Otherwise, you can't deliver. But I think sometimes there are people who aren't ready to give you air cover, and that's really tricky, right? There might be people who are used to thinking of, your digital content in a more sort of traditional way, and so that's what comes back to what I said at the beginning: is you have to make your content actually deliver on the mission itself rather than promote it. Because if you're just promoting it, it's almost like, why would they do that? But if you can show how it's helping to deliver it, like Paul has shown, Claire has shown, then that money is worth it. And then that air cover is worth it. And also I think, sometimes when COVID came and all of a sudden people are thinking, oh, we can't do things our traditional way. Now let's do things digitally. Oh my God, let's do this digitally. This is amazing. Well, if your digital channels your content was already delivering on your mission, then you're like, yep, give me more budget. Like you're primed rather than just thinking, oh, let's start from scratch and, an experiment, which obviously is still fine if that's what you had to do. But, if you tie yourself into that, it's a lot easier to convince leadership to kind of give you that cover.
Claire, your director, Liz Carlisle, is the doyen of think tank directors, I would say. Do you have anything to add to this?
No, I mean, it's a good measure to have someone like Liz, and when, most of the time she's jumping up and down with excitement, which is always a bonus, so that that you've got that champion. But she really does. I tell you what she does, which is really great for our team. Actually, she really gets stuck in, so she actually understands and knows what you're trying to do. And so she's kind of in at that ground level so that she can explain it to anyone that asks, and she can properly champion it. And that's what she is trying to do, fight some of those battles for us so that we can do it, but she needs to understand it in order to be in that place. So yeah, that's what she tries to do as much as possible.
Bill, a bit on this subject, I guess. One of the things that you mentioned, Claire, was the issue of being the end of pipe. How comms being at the end of the pipe when everyone else has already done their work. Is there anything? What can we do to stop that happening? And I will just say that we've got the great Helen Dempster in the audience as well, who knows a lot about this. So Helen, do feel free to click the blue button and join us if you want to talk to us about this.
Yeah, end of pipe. It's a tricky place to be, and we do try and get into conversations as early as possible. And we're talking about getting in conversations even at kind of proposal funding stage, just so that when the budgets are put together, people are factoring in money for comms investment, for digital content. We're trying to get away. We really want to move away from that model where we get given a 40-page research report and told to go and market it. We want to be in the conversations right at the beginning that asks, what are you trying to do? Who are you talking to? And this is what it's going to cost to do that really well. And we're working with our business development team to be part of that funding process, so that we're actually, you know, in the same way that you talk to the finance team, in the same way that you talk to your directors, you bring comms into those conversations as well to really help us be part of the beginning of that.
I just want to jump in on that question.
Yeah, just backing up what Claire's saying, early and often is the key to success with these things, because if they've already written the report and they're like, here you go, now make the digital component, we're not doing it right. And I think we need to be very careful about distinguishing between the report and then the digital report. It should just be the report, and then the digital should be assumed. Like, because if we're not doing digital along with that report, we're not doing good reports, period.
I think I'd add to 100% agree, but it's that feedback loop. And so like when Claire said, you know, they feedback the data, the performance monthly to the teams, then it's building that back in, so that when it's time for their report or their piece of work, they're thinking, I want it to be like that, you know, and you're kind of in there. And then if you think about the formats that I was mentioning earlier on, if you've got your formats, and you're taking that out and sharing that with the rest of the organization, so then when it's time to do their thinking, you're like, okay, great, which formats are you thinking that you'd like to use? You know, which formats do you think might work for this piece of work or this piece of work? And that way you're actually ahead of them. You know, it's a loop rather than a pipe, you know?
What about when we have a sort of more academic kind of think tank? I'm thinking of a lot of my clients have researchers who will judge their success on whether they are published in a particular journal, right? So that's how they build their academic credibility. That's how they build their career. They're not so much worried about whether they're published on the website or how many people click on the website. How do we get through to those people, or do we just shove them to one side and not worry about them?
I mean, at IIED, we spend quite a lot of time working with individuals. So our experts are you know, one of IIED's biggest assets, if not IIED's biggest asset. So we work with those researchers to build up their profile in the same way that we'll be building up IIED's profile. So we encourage them to publish on ORCID, on ResearchGate, on Google Scholar, to share, and really build up. Because if they have good digital profiles, we will support those. So while on Twitter I'm talking about IIED, I want them to be talking about their research. I want them to be showing that they're an expert. I want them to be showing all the work that they're doing and why they're so valuable to IIED. So we actually have, as part of our induction process with our researchers and kind of ongoing training, is helping them to understand how to build up those digital profiles so that IIEDs can support that and share it with our audiences.
So you talked about data a bit, Claire, and how you present this kind of data. I have other clients that do that, and you know, sometimes it's just kind of water off a duck's back. They kind of see it and they just kind of like, oh, that's nice. So is there anything that you do to sort of contextualize what they're seeing and say, this thing performed well because of this reason and this reason and this reason. So here's the thing to emulate, as it were.
Yeah, we've been through quite a few iterations of how to share the data with our organisation. It's actually little and often. Too much data is quite overwhelming for some people. And also we try to present the same thing so that people understand benchmarks. It's easier for them to see when something's done well or when something's not doing quite so well, if they can relate to it. What we do are kind of list of things like the top 10 blog posts this month, the top 10 publications this month, where in the world are people coming from this month, with a nice map, and building up that kind of picture, so that people get an idea of kind of what it looks like. And also we're hoping, so if you publish something that month, am I in the top 10? There's that healthy kind of competition element at the same time of understanding, oh, this month it was this event on biodiversity, all the biodiversity stuff did really well. We can make those connections. I also have a monthly stat fact, which is based a bit more on not just looking at the numbers, but you know, this was understanding a bit more how the comms links to those numbers, and using that as a kind of push as well to explain some things.
Fabulous. But we're actually out of time, but we've been given an extension because of my shoes, I think. And, if you're all happy to stay on for another 5 minutes or so, is that okay? Fabulous.
Sure. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, just one other thing that we've got a question in the chat around promoting work on traditional channels and different kind of channels. And one of the things that I sort of found myself saying to a client the other day was, what happens on Twitter stays on Twitter. They were judging their kind of Twitter performance on, does it direct people to their website and get people reading the report. What's the correct kind of balance, do we think, for think tanks on that kind of on channels?
In terms of Twitter, yeah, I mean, it's really tricky because we found this with social networks as well, is that there is a balance, because ultimately a social network wants to keep you on their social network. That's how they make their money. So they're not, they don't always want to send you to other places. So we do encourage things like Twitter moments, Twitter chats, threads. We put a lot of information into Twitter so that people can build up a picture if that is their only channel. We are linking to the website as much as possible, but it doesn't drive a huge amount of traffic. Although that has gone up in lockdown, it doesn't drive a huge amount of traffic. What I would say is it's part of you building up your profile. So you build up your profile on Twitter in a certain way. You build up your profile on Facebook in a slightly different, but you build that up in another way. You do it on YouTube around your more kind of video content. All these different kind of snippets are showing different people, or maybe the same person, you in different ways, in the strengths of your content and in those different places. So it's all part of building up that bigger picture.
On that question.
I'd definitely agree with that. I think Twitter, it's a niche audience, it's very enjoyable, but it's not necessarily worth investing a lot of your organization's time in per se. I would always recommend putting it on your website, because that's where the long tail of it is. That's where the findability ultimately lasts. And if you've done it well, if you've done, your search engine optimization, you've done everything, then it can be found. Like that Science and Art article written 12 years ago is still, one of the top ranking for the site. So it's definitely worth it. I think you have to decide, like Claire said really smartly, which channel for which thing. And so we decided in our social media strategy that Facebook was when we wanted something to then be directed onto our website after. It was about traffic. It was about directing traffic, capturing and directing. Whereas Instagram, we would never give an ongoing link. That was about giving a moment then and there. So, it was about brand building. It was about, a feeling. And then it was fine for us. We didn't evaluate the success of our Instagram by whether people went on. So it's about really being specific with your channel and what you want it to do. But I 100% say, the traditional thing, you ultimately, your website is you, right? Your website is your organization. So it must live there first.
One last thing is we in terms of social media, sometimes we have clients who have individual researchers or individual people there who have a better social media presence than the actual organization itself. And one of the things I've noticed since I've been, we now have a presence in Washington, DC, and I've been going there fairly regularly, is that DC think tanks are better at using themselves as a platform for individual people to build their personal brand. And that's something we're not quite so good at in the UK. Claire, do you think there's more of a role for think tanks in helping people build up their personal brand, and how that feeds back into the main brand?
I do. I think it's all part of the same thing, actually. It's all part of the whole, and the people make you and the organization who you are, and you need to support each other. And I was saying we spend quite a lot of time with our researchers to encourage them to build up their profiles as much as possible, and to use their voice and not be afraid of that, to add a person to a research report, to make it a bit more personable and a bit more approachable, because me and my comms team will do the organizational stuff. So we need to add a face and to add a person behind that report and a bit of a emotion to it as well. So yes, I would say that it's great to have those champions in your organization as well, because there's still some people in our organization who won't go near a social network. So having those people who are really strong on it helps to kind of build up that idea that it's a good place to be for our academics and our researchers, and that people are reading social media and engaging in that way with your organization and your experts.
Any final words from Paul and Jen before I close out this session? Nope. Thank you. Right. Thank you, everyone. That was a brilliant session. It's been wonderful to see you all. Thank you, panelists. And we'll see you all at the next online think tank conference. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye.